What's going on, U.S. History kids? Mr. Tomei here, coming at you with another video. Make sure to like and subscribe. This time we're changing the scenery, coming live from my super $1 million mansion. You know how it is. Limited edition TV, clothing, Gucci belts only. You know how I do. Here's what we're doing today. We're talking about Westward Expansion, America growing and moving westward, a little bit about manifest destiny. That's mainly what we're focusing today. Normally, if you take a U.S. history class, the way, the state of California wants you to learn is that you learn everything after the Civil War. But because you haven't really talked about U.S. history or even revisited U.S. history since 8th grade, I think it's important that we cover some of the things before the Civil War. So that's why we're covering so much information in this first unit. Today we'll just cover some of the most important stuff. And this video shouldn't be too long, I think. So we'll go forward from that. All right, so here we go. All right, let's start off. 1803, we get the Louisiana Purchase. A growing population. The federal government realized that, we need to expand land so that there was more land to develop, to farm, so people could move and develop. And so we looked at the Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase, named after King Louis, Louisiana. It's like Louis' land. It starts, pretty much falls kind of the Mississippi River. If you look here, kind of where the mouse is falling, that's what the Mississippi River is. So everything kind of to the left of that, up until about the Rockies, was kind of considered like Louisiana, that territory. And even back in this time, there's still the Spanish have pretty much control throughout the Southwest, most of the West Coast, California, right, Nevada, Arizona. We'll talk about that later. And even up in the Northwest is still like British territory through Canada and such. So the Louisiana Purchase was a purchase that was bought for a need, and the need was so that people in the eastern half of the United States, right, could expand and move westward. France was more than willing to sell this land in this territory because they were fighting a war with the British and they desperately needed money. And so the American government bought the land, and it doubled the size of the United States overnight. But little was really known about this land. Even in the early 1800s, there were only really some small settlements, and for the most part, everything west of the Mississippi is much more rugged, much less developed. There's not like roads and towns and places to sleep. It really is the wild, wild west. And so there was a need to understand what was out there. And so what happened was we started to explore and go west. And we really became interested in expanding westward. The government even commissioned like expedition trips, like the famous Lewis and Clark expedition, to explore the West and understand like what obstacles were awaiting westward expansion. So you see here, Lewis and Clark expedition, they pretty much followed a bunch of rivers, the Missouri River all the way up and eventually across and into like kind of like Oregon country, what we considered like Portland area, modern day Oregon. Pretty long trip, it took about 2 whole years round trip. So, but it was really important because the discovery with the Lewis and Clark's notes and research and discovery found, is what laid west of the Mississippi and what could be found, and that there was a lot of resources out there. So people became really motivated to go west, look for opportunities for their own land, just in general, more economic opportunities and more freedom, which was very compelling. And so as people began to move west, obviously they encountered a lot of indigenous groups that were still hanging on. The few remaining tribes that were still thriving at this time, post Columbus, like genocide and decimation. And so naturally there's going to be a lot of conflicts, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that as well. So you go, just a typical kind of artwork that was done, the cattle, the cattle wagon, right? The family and the wagon and all that. Scenes, kind of, art depicting westward expansion. We'll get back to that in a second. Another kind of important thing to know about this time period is the Monroe Doctrine. This comes about in the 1820s. President James Monroe, this is pretty much the only thing he's really remembered for, at least the only thing you need to know him for. Pretty famous doctrine that says any further attempts by European empires to come to any part of the Americas, not just like the United States, but like Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central America, South America, the United States would view that as an act of war. And so it was definitely like a moment for the United States to say, hey, we're going to flex on you guys, and we're going to make you call our bluff and see if you're actually going to stick around here, or if you're going to leave, or you're going to continue to come over here. Reality is no one really challenged the United States. No one called their bluff, and everyone kind of dipped out. And most of the other European empires would soon leave. They'd give up their colonies, and they never came back. And a part of that is the Monroe Doctrine kind of scared off some of the European empires from coming over to the Americas. So the Monroe Doctrine is pretty important because it kind of left the United States as the main superpower in both North and South America. And in terms of the power dynamics, the geopolitical power dynamics of it all, it still plays a role today in how the United States is so successful and so powerful compared to a lot of the other countries in the Americas. Now we're going to talk about manifest destiny. Let me move the screen right down here. So manifest destiny is the belief that Americans, the people who were living in America, were justified by like a God-given right, like a higher power, to expand westward. And that expansion was inevitable. This way of thinking is problematic, but it was used to justify further decimation and destruction that would come for the Western American indigenous peoples. So, in terms of taking land from the indigenous peoples, forcing them to move, even it was used to justify the killings, right? The rapes of these people, the wiping out of their bloodlines. Manifest destiny was used to justify it because the concept that the European, the American white settlers, they were better and they weren't savages and they were seen as higher level than the indigenous people, and that the indigenous people, they didn't know how to use their land. They were wasting the land. They were wasting the resources. And it's just all in all a very ignorant held belief. But manifest destiny was used to pretty much expand the United States from coast to coast. And so, we are here in California, we are a product and we are settling on what was once indigenous people's lands. As we already learned, the Ohlone people lived here. And so we haven't, as in a country, we haven't still fully addressed and recognized that. And it is kind of important to understand the history about, kind of like the last kind of era and the final stages of what life was like for indigenous people. This was kind of like the final, what they knew as their way of life kind of being the same, was kind of the 1800s. This is an image here kind of just depicting manifest destiny. There's a lot of symbolism in here. And just to point out real quickly, the centerpiece is this very large kind of angelic creature, representing kind of a god divinity, like a divine right. She's marching towards what looks to be the wilderness, because you'll see the rugged mountains, the wild buffalo, the wild bear, and then the indigenous people who are running away from this creature, or this divine angel. Following her is settlers, farmers, gold panners, explorers, trains, electrical wiring. And so if you also look at the sky, you'll notice to the right is like the light, and that's where the settlers, that's where the Europeans, like the settled, the not savage part of the painting is, whereas to the left, to the west, that's like darker. And that was not just by accident, that was by design. The concept here in the artwork is all about pretty much how the divine, angelic, kind of like white settler is here to conquer the West and bring the light to these people. Which is, again, it kind of just at the time, as we look back on it, it's a very ignorant held belief because these people were doing fine and thriving on their own. But we had a lot of Americans back then, a lot of people who came west had this ignorance that these people were just savages and wasting the land. And so we pretty much took the land from them. And so this painting does a really good job, I think, of really symbolizing what Manifest Destiny is all about. And it's about pushing out the rugged savages, right, for the people who should use that land, which is all sorts of messed up. This kind of really boils over when we get to the Indian Removal Act. This is in 1830. As Americans moved west, there just continued to be conflicts with the native indigenous peoples who obviously are going to fight to protect their land. The government pretty much decided, well, whatever, we own this land because of Louisiana Purchase and whatnot. And so they decided to simply take the indigenous people's lands. And so this was the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from their homelands. Many remaining tribes were forced to relocate in what we would now know as present-day Oklahoma. And so the march to Oklahoma by these indigenous peoples is often referred to as the Trail of Tears. Many people died, and just it was these people. Imagine being stripped from your home and never being able to see it again and being forced. You didn't even get a say. So just a very sad part of our history, and it's a pretty embarrassing part of our history. But it's important that we recognize it. And so kind of with this Indian Removal Act, this was pretty much the near conclusion for the way of life for indigenous peoples in the Americas. It was after this, the majority of the other tribes kind of, were pretty much outcast by American society and still have been to today, and really have not been well represented or supported by the government. And so this is, we see kind of this legacy in symbols today. So this is the state flag of Oklahoma, and there's actually a lot of like indigenous symbols that make up this flag. There's like, you'll see kind of looks like what to be like a smoke pipe or a club. I'm not exactly sure. The kind of feathers and somewhat of like a dream catcher. Again, I'm not exactly sure on what those symbols are, but they're definitely in reference to the indigenous people that live in Oklahoma. No other state in the United States has as many indigenous, like American Indians, as Oklahoma does per capita. So if you go to Oklahoma, there's a significant indigenous American presence you can find there, more than really any other state. This is just depicting the Trail of Tears. People mostly from the Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee region pretty much spread west, and they took different trails, some along the rivers, some just along falling city to city, but eventually settled in Oklahoma. This is just artwork depicting it. This looks like it's in winter, but they take their horses and all their supplies and they were forced to move. And so Andrew Jackson was the guy who was all behind this. Andrew Jackson's legacy is he was one of our presidents. And he's pretty in general problematic. Actually, turn on my TV. And he's just, he was a really messed up guy. As president, he was all behind this. Even here, his quote is, by persuasion and force, they have been made to retire from river to river, from mountain to mountain, until some of the tribes become extinct and others have left but remnants to preserve for a while their once terrible names. Surrounded by the whites with their arts of civilization, which by destroying the resources of the savage doom him to weakness and decay. That whole quote, pretty much to summarize it and to make sense of it for you, pretty much saying, you know, it's a good thing that these Indians are no more. They have terrible sounding names. Their culture was beneath the Europeans, and it's probably for the best that they're going extinct. I mean, pretty much supporting genocide, right? You could make the comparison to other people that we've talked about, Columbus or Hitler or Stalin, right? That's pretty much what that language is saying. So pretty terrible part of our history, but yet he's on the $20 bill till this day. You know, he's still on our money, and that's kind of crazy. So it's a sad, embarrassing part of our history, but we're here to recognize it, and hopefully we can move forward and, you know, do things to change, and hopefully maybe one day we won't have to see his face on the money. At least that's what I hope for. Again, this just shows you the death and decimation that comes from the Westford Expansion, and the final remaining tribes were truly decimated in this Westward Expansion. Pretty brutal killings. So, so with that, the next big event that we're going to talk about is the Mexican-American War. This is a short war. It's a little over 2 years, from 1846 to 1848. This was over just land and territory, a dispute along the southern border. The U.S. annexed Texas and was creeping towards Mexican territory. Annex just means to, like, take a state, to adopt it. Like if you were to adopt the little cute little puppy. Annex just means to take it in as a state. This led to a lot of border skirmishes between Mexico and the United States. And so Mexico became agitated. And so these battles eventually boiled over and became an all-out war. In the end, Mexico loses. They take that L. And they have to give up a large chunk of their territory as a part of the treaty to the United States. This territory is what we would know as the Southwest United States and California. And so this image just shows you the territory in dark blue is what Mexico became after the war. But before the war, Mexico had, you know, all those territories in the kind of checkerboard light blue. And Texas itself was kind of disputed. Texas eventually became a full state. And so this is important because this war now laid the foundation for pretty much what our country is going to look like. It gave us the states California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. So pretty, you know, cities like Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, Phoenix, had Mexico won this war, the Mexicans won this war, you know, living here in California might be very different. Maybe we're like learn about Mexican history instead of U.S. history, right? And maybe I'm, you know, speaking fluent Spanish versus English. So this war is very important, and it really changed the course of, like, you know, history. Imagine if California was a part of Mexico, how much that would, how much more money, resources, food, in general, just quality and the powerhouse that Mexico would be, right? Would they be as powerful as the United States? Perhaps. You can make that argument. This war really drastically changed Mexico's history as well. And so what's kind of big about California and what really started attracting people to come west was the discovery of gold. So in 1948, gold was discovered up in the Sierra Mountains. And so people became gold crazy because everyone's like, oh, I'm going to go to California and find my golden nugget and become rich. And so people came west and they took their chances to find gold and become rich. That's why we're called the Golden State. So the images I have up here depict kind of gold mining up in these gold mining towns. You can go to them today, actually, and they still have a lot of the same tools and machines and like factories that were used to mine for gold. You'll also notice that it's not just like white settlers. It's also, you have like a significant portion of like Asian influence, specifically the Chinese. A lot of the Chinese came to the West, and they came to America, and they worked, you know, building railroads, working in kind of hotel industry, doing a lot of the service work for the European settlers. They weren't paid a lot, and they were treated very poorly, but this is a big reason why there's such a large, especially here in California, in the Bay Area, aka like a Chinatown in San Francisco. It has to do with, you know, the influence of the Chinese immigration that was happening during this time period. And as they came to the West Coast, and many people settled in San Francisco, which was kind of the hub for the whole gold rush movement. That's why we have such a big Asian preference, specifically a Chinese preference, especially like a Chinatown in here in California. And that's why the San Francisco 49ers are called the San Francisco 49ers. Some of you are probably 49ers fans. Right on. Go Niners. But the 49ers, that name is referring to someone that came to California, was in the year 1849. Those people were called 49ers. Mind blown. Their mascot, Sourdough Sam, kind of looks very similar to like those prospectors. Let me go back. All right. Kind of has that similar vibe. Look at this. This is why they pay me the big bucks, people. No other teachers can do that. And then this is just showing you kind of what early San Francisco kind of looked like in terms of like the way we think of it as a city. So this is kind of looking out into the bay, that island in the middle, Treasure Island. So this is before the Bay Bridge. So back in these days, you had to take the ferry to get across if you want to go to the city. And so, yeah, so it's just, you know, today's lesson really talking about Westward Expansion, some of the important things. Make sure to look for the assignment that's going to be attached to this video. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and let me know. All right, y'all, have a good one.